you can't beat them, join them. If you're scared to fight it out, watch him and watch out. If you think your girl's a good looker, take a good look at this guy's dolls.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
The new Bond. The different 007 on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
After the release and box office success of You Only Live Twice, the producers of the James Bond franchise were in a bit of a sticky situation. Sean Connery publicly announced to the world that he would no longer portray James Bond, leaving Albert Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman to begin finding a replacement to take over the role. Longtime Bond film editor Peter Hunt was commissioned to direct the upcoming film, as well as leading the charge in helping to cast the next actor to play James Bond. The crew and producers searched high and low for a possible candidate when one day, fate came knocking on their door. A man entered Eon Productions' London office, dashing his way past the secretary, and before long, found himself face to face with Harry Saltzman. He managed to bluff his way into an audition and impressed Hunt so much that he became determined to cast him as James Bond. The unknown man's opportunity at superstardom was granted when he accidentally injured a stunt double by punching him in the nose, and Broccoli was so impressed with his physicality that he immediately made his mind and said, "We're going with you." This man they went with was none other than George Lazenby, and he would go on to become the second actor to play the role of James Bond in the next film on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
If you think you know your Bond, think again. This one's different.
It's true!
Drop everything. Try and make it. Marvelous is the password for the different Bond.
On Her Majesty's Secret Service was actually supposed to be made after Goldfinger, even being advertised as such in original release prints in the end credits. However, it was delayed due to the controversy surrounding Thunderball at the time, and again due to lack of optimal weather conditions in the film's Switzerland setting at the time, leading the filmmakers to adapt You Only Live Twice instead. Hunt argued that the series was beginning to grow more ridiculous in scale, and opted to create a more faithful adaptation of Ian Fleming's original novel in order to keep the pacing of the story more grounded in reality. This also meant that gadgets would take a back seat this time around in favor of an increased focus on action and death-defying stunts, although Q would still appear in the film as well.
The book of On Her Majesty's Secret Service was a great story, and it was a Fleming James Bond book. And so we didn't have to deviate. I didn't want to deviate. I didn't want to put gimmicks and tricks in it to make it. It didn't need making better. It was there. It was all there.
There's no way to talk about the rest of the film without first addressing the elephant in the room that is George Lazenby. Of course, he's famous in the Bond world for having portrayed the role of James Bond only once, as well as Bond being the first ever acting role he ever played in film, having only previously appeared in chocolate bar commercials. Because of this status, he's been recognized as something of an enigma in the Bond franchise. At the time, the filmmakers had universally agreed that the next actor they hired needed to be someone who resembled Sean Connery. Lazenby recalled seeing a James Bond film at an early age, and despite having no experience, he knew that the lifestyle of Bond appealed to him, and he made it a personal goal to obtain the role.
But here's this guy who can get any girl he wants, kills people who gets in his way. Jesus, I'd like to be that guy. And that's when it started. I had nothing on my mind, night and day, except getting that job. I wasn't an actor. I want that job, though.
As a kid, Lazenby's casting as Bond always puzzled me. I remember staring at the VHS tape cover many years ago and wondered why no one talked about him, or why I hadn't seen him in any other Bond films. Was he really as bad as everyone said he was? Or was he simply a victim of unfortunate circumstances? Even today, I still wonder what kind of direction the series would have taken had Lazenby opted to stay for one or two additional films. As for his performance in the film itself, here's what I think. Even though he does resemble Sean Connery in looks, it's pretty obvious upon watching the film that he is definitely not the same James Bond. Due to this film being his first rodeo in acting, there are some moments where his performance is a little rough around the edges. In a lot of his scenes, he doesn't quite have the same confidence and swagger that Sean Connery did. He just seems to perform with a more subdued personality and without as much range and emotion. One could argue that this is a strength and makes Lazenby more closely resemble a cold-hearted 00 agent with a license to kill, but having seen this film many times, I don't think that's the case. I believe that the filmmakers were trying to show a more sensitive side of Bond, given what happens later in the story, and I do think for the most part it does come through quite well. The more quiet and reflective parts of the film seem to be where Lazenby actually shines the most, whereas the more intense and confrontational ones are where he's a bit lacking. But there's a lot more ground that we have to cover first before I can give my full opinion, so let's dive right into it. The way Bond is introduced in this film is very similar to the way he was introduced in Dr. No. There's a series of close-up shots of Bond as he's driving through the countryside, but his face is obscured from view. He's chasing after a woman who's also driving down the road, before stopping at a beach and walking into the ocean so she can commit suicide. Noticing this, Bond decides to race from his car and stop the woman from going into the water. This leads to his formally introducing himself to both the woman and the audience.
Good morning. My name's Bond. James Bond.
Right after this, Bond gets held up by some goons of unknown origin, but he manages to brawl his way out of it as usual. It's pretty awesome to see Bond just flying his fists with reckless abandon. All we need is some Jim Ross commentary, and you've got yourself some classic sports entertainment. The scene also manages to top it all off with some classic third wall breaking humor in the form of a one-liner.
This never happened to the other fella.
The film then kicks into gear with its title sequence, though instead of a traditional theme with lyrics, we get a pretty kick-ass instrumental piece. Probably the filmmaker's way of starting fresh with a new actor, in the same way Dr. No opened its intro with the James Bond theme. It's interesting to see how images from previous films were used for this intro in order to remind audiences that even though Connery is gone, James Bond will still go on with the passage of time. After this, we see Bond entering a hotel and into a casino where he meets the woman he saved from the beach just earlier. The woman is Contessa Teresa de Vicenzo, nicknamed Tracy, and played by Avengers and Game of Thrones actress Diana Rigg. She thanks Bond for saving her and invites him to her hotel room, but ends up being ambushed in another brawl. Once Bond gets that over with, he returns to his room to find Tracy there as well, and you can see how the filmmakers wanted to keep his personality pretty similar to Connery's. After they inevitably end up shagging, Bond is apprehended once more by goons, who then take him to meet the head of a crime syndicate named Draco, played by Italian actor Gabriele Ferzetti. As it happens, Draco is the father of Tracy, who is his only child, and has a pretty weird idea of therapy for remedying his daughter's troubled past.
She needs help.
Your help.
I find her fascinating, but she needs a psychiatrist, not me.
What she needs is a man to dominate her, to make love to her enough to make her love him. A man like you.
Bond refuses to marry Tracy just out of the blue like this, but agrees to romancing her if Draco can provide the location of Ernst Stavro Blofeld, who is still in charge of Spectre and on the run from MI6. Bond returns to MI6 to relay the possible lead to M, but he's relieved from his mission in order to focus on other priorities, and this causes some tension between the two parties. From here on out, the majority of the film takes place in the mountains of Switzerland, with one exception. Bond and Tracy begin a whirlwind romance at Draco's birthday party, and the two start to bond in a montage of scenes of the two being cute with each other. I know I might be a bit early in saying this, but this scene is my favorite in the whole film. There's so many things they get right with it. In previous Bond films, the Bond girls more or less fell in love with Bond either because he was handsome or they were an accessory to the mission. That doesn't mean they all had shallow personalities and that they didn't have their fair share of cute moments now and then, but On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the first film to really show Bond and the girl having a proper chance to be intimate and fall in love with each other. And the way it's filmed is so realistic. Rather than listening in on every word, almost every shot is filmed from a distance, almost from a voyeuristic perspective, which leaves the audience to use their imagination to fill in the blanks of what they're saying to each other. And the love theme performed by Louis Armstrong makes things so much better. This was the last original song Armstrong ever recorded, and it's a real treat to hear such a sweet song playing in the background of one of the most romantic scenes in the entire franchise. Those cheeky grins they share with each other in the car, come on, how can you not smile at that? Unfortunately, Tracy disappears for a good chunk of the film after the scene while Bond resumes his mission. He eventually finds out that Blofeld is located at the top of the Swiss Alps in a research institute atop the Piz Gloria. He poses as a genealogist corresponding with Blofeld to gather more information about his evil plot, and it's not long before the two come face to face. In this film, Blofeld is played by Telly Savalas, making him the second actor to play the role, and man, oh man is he good. While I do like Pleasance's performance of Blofeld, I have to admit he doesn't have the same menace compared to Savalas. His deep booming voice resonates with his persona to a T, and he looks physically imposing enough to go toe-to-toe with Bond, rather than just sending some of his muscle to do his dirty work. Hell, he even does chase after him along with his goons on more than one occasion, which adds a personal flair to his vendetta with Bond. But his evil plot this time, even by Bond standards, is a little far-fetched. He recruits 12 women from across the world whom he refers to as the Angels of Death. They all live and sleep together under one roof while being brainwashed by him and his confidant Irma Bunt, played by German actress Ilse Steppard. Blofeld brainwashes these women to spread a bacteriological agent known as the virus Omega, under the guise that their procedures will cure them of their allergies. This would ultimately help Blofeld contaminate and sterilize the world's food supply, resulting in worldwide famine. But if I may ask, what exactly does hypnosis have to do with bacteriological warfare?
That will remain my secret.
Alright, now for the moments that stand out for me, starting with the good of course. Well, I think one of the main attractions is Diana Rigg's performance of Tracy. I know I already commented on her earlier in the review, but I just need to dedicate a portion of this review solely to her. Simply put, Tracy is, without a doubt, the best Bond girl of the 1960s era of Bond films, and a possible candidate for best Bond girl of all time. Even though she disappears for most of the second act of the film, she makes up for it in the third act with one of the most headstrong performances in the entire series. For one, she ends up driving the car instead of Bond in the scene where Bunt and her men chase after the two in the ice race. She also isn't afraid to follow Bond into danger even on the slopes of the Alps, and often to the detriment of those following behind her.
Lots of guts.
Aside from this, she also has an awesome fight scene near the end when Bond and Draco's men raid the Piz Gloria. Due to being a woman, she's naturally overpowered by other Spectre goons and has to use her wits and tools to survive the situation, and it's just a blast to see it all happen on screen. Even with this natural toughness she exerts, she also knows when to show emotion and allows herself to be close to Bond due to the connection they share from events in the beginning of the film, and in a surprising twist from previous films, Bond reciprocates these feelings and beyond.
I love you. I know I'll never find another girl like you. Will you marry me?
You mean it?
I mean it.
The action scenes are also entertaining as hell. While they don't have the same explosive flavor as previous films, they're still just as exhilarating as ever. A lot of this is due in part to the stunt work of professional skier Willy Bogner, who was responsible for filming much of the footage used during the ski chases on the Alps. The chases are fast-paced, action-packed, and have lots of creative camera angles to show every highlight there is to offer. I remember the second chase being my favorite scene as a kid, just because of how awesome it was to see Bond on skis and making everyone tumble over themselves in the trees. It was hilarious, and it really made me interested in practicing my own skills in skiing. But even when fighting on flat ground, whether with guns or fists, the action scenes are still intense. They just have a visceral quality that Connery's films can't compare. Lazenby is fantastic in these brawls. He's absolutely in his element when he's just hauling haymakers to everyone within arm's reach and destroying any furniture he sees. One of my favorite scenes, however, is one that has no action at all. In order to find Blofeld's location, Bond has to infiltrate an office which Draco claims has information that will lead him in the right direction. What follows is 5 minutes of pure suspense. No dialogue, no over-the-top brawls, just a simple waiting game where Bond has to crack a safe before its owner returns. All complete with some fan service for the boys. It's one of the few instances in the series where a film takes a break from the craziness like this, again harkening back to Dr. No when Bond investigated rooms and looked around for clues. Speaking of Dr. No, there's also an interesting moment where Bond is tidying up his office, and you can hear the Mango Tree song playing in the background. It seems the filmmakers did everything in their power to reassure audiences' expectations at the time, even showing some of Bond's old gadgets that he used in the past. It adds a nice touch of nostalgia to an already nostalgic film.
Sorry, ma'am.
However, this part does lead into the more negative things I have to say about the film. I understand audiences at the time may have been nervous about a new actor, and the filmmakers wanted as close of a replica to Connery as possible, but I can't help but feel they couldn't commit to a concrete personality to Bond's character here. Part of the blame may fall on Lazenby's inexperience as an actor, but even so, the dialogue written in the script keeps going back and forth as to what kind of person he is. One scene that really bothered me in this regard is the scene where Bond is in Pete's Gloria and he's invited to the room where one of the Angels of Death is sleeping in. He eventually seduces her, which completely reverses the character development established between him and Tracy earlier in the film. I guess one could say he was trying to get more information and do whatever he could to complete the mission, but a few minutes later, he's doing it again, and he uses nearly the exact same dialogue as he did with the previous woman. If it weren't for the final act of the film when Tracy finally reappears to save the day, I would have assumed that the filmmakers were going for the traditional playboy personality that Connery's Bond always was. But because of that romantic interlude from earlier, we're stuck with two different kinds of Bond in the same film. Compare this to You Only Live Twice, when Aki questions Bond if he was literally in bed with the enemy.
He didn't chase her. He did it so I could get away. He wouldn't touch that horrible girl. You wouldn't, would you?
Oh, heaven forbid. Any progress? Yes.
Here, it makes sense because Connery's portrayal of Bond has been consistent since the beginning with Dr. No. His focus is on the mission, and any women who throw themselves at him in the process are just perks of the job. But here, Lazenby's Bond can't commit to an identity. He develops a relationship with Tracy, then sleeps with multiple women at the Pete's Gloria, only to fall back in love with Tracy again despite being missing for an hour in the film, like the second act never happened. I find it hard to believe that Lazenby's Bond wouldn't have some degree of remorse for this, considering that they did try to show a more sensitive side to him in this film, and the effort Bond goes to rescuing her at the end of the film too. It doesn't really ruin the film for me, but it does sour what could have been the best relationship in the entire series.
It's not New Year yet.
Aside from this, there's not really anything else too major to complain about, mostly just continuity errors, minor nitpicks, and the general ridiculousness of Blofeld's evil plot. I'm not sure why Blofeld doesn't recognize Bond when he arrives at Pete's Gloria, considering they met face to face in the previous film. It's funny because by itself, the film is a pretty faithful adaptation of the original source material. It's just an unfortunate narrative circumstance due to the film being delayed for release so many times, which is why Blofeld's appearance here is treated once again like it's the first time they ever meet. But it makes me wonder, if they could take the liberty of introducing Blofeld on screen in You Only Live Twice, why not take a few liberties with how Blofeld interacts with Bond here? Like some sort of mental jousting, for instance, where they recognize each other but still try to outdo one another, like in Thunderball, just not as long and drawn out.
And how many 100 millions do you want for your services this time, Blofeld?
This time? This time the price is of another kind. You'll be even more amused when you know what. In the meanwhile, I will keep you here as my guest. You'll be very useful in helping to convince the authorities that I mean what I say. And I'll do what I claim.
Now, here is where I would normally wrap up my review and summarize it in a nutshell, but there's one more thing that I still gotta talk about, and that's the ending. After Bond foils Blofeld's plot once again, he and Tracy get married, and she officially takes James's last name while celebrating with friends and loved ones. It's nice to see all the key members of MI6 together outside the office. We even get to see a rare instance of respect from Q.
Yes, Papa?
Look, James, I know that we haven't always exactly seen... Well, anyway, don't forget, if there's anything you ever need...
Thank you, Q, but this time I've got the gadgets. I know how to use them.
Afterwards, the two newlyweds drive off into the countryside preparing for their honeymoon and the rest of their lives together. Bond eventually pulls over to the side of the road to remove wedding decorations from their car, and then it happens.
It's Blofeld. Blofeld.
When I saw this as a kid, I couldn't believe it. Bond had finally found the one woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with, and her life is suddenly gone in the blink of an eye, leaving Bond to cradle his dead wife in his arms. And you know what? That's where it ends. No chasing after Blofeld, no grand funeral for Tracy, it ends right there. Even today, I still get goosebumps watching the scene because it happens out of nowhere, and it's the most emotionally distressed we see Bond at this point in the series. It's no wonder the film was so controversial when it came out in 1969. The film had a brand new actor with big shoes to fill, gadgets and other gimmicks were missing entirely, and the ending was no doubt a kick in the balls to contemporary audiences expecting something more traditional, especially considering how happy the wedding scene turned out. George Lazenby in particular took a big hit to his reputation when it was announced during production that he would only star in one film. His agent convinced him that the Bond franchise was going to become outdated and that peace and love in the liberated culture of the time would become the new message. Celebrities, TV pundits, and even his own family members ridiculed him for turning down the opportunity of a lifetime. His name was downplayed in marketing material used in promotion for the film, and he wasn't even invited to the premiere simply because he chose to grow out his hair, though he did end up inviting himself anyway.
When the film was finished, you went on a publicity tour of the United States, which you paid for yourself. Why?
On principle, I was promised a tour of the United States to publicize the film. I was looking forward to it. And because of my beard and long hair, I wasn't allowed to go. I was allowed to go on the condition that I looked like James Bond. And I said, well, anyone can understand that James Bond isn't a real person. And they're not going to mind the fact that I haven't had a shave for a month. You know, everyone knows that James Bond must have a beard, even though you never see it in the film, if he doesn't shave. And anyway, it all ended up, they sent Diana Rigg, so I went on afterwards and arranged my own tour.
It's really unfortunate that he received such a bad rap before, during, and after the film's release, because he's not that bad of an actor. Honestly, it takes a skilled performer to pull off being Bond in the first place, and considering this was his first ever acting role, he did a hell of a job with the skills he had at the time. And for what he may have lacked in intimidation, he absolutely nailed it in terms of raw physical aggression and especially emotional depth. The moments he stares at Tracy in admiration, the way he kisses her cheek in the middle of a car chase, even the times when he compliments her and says "good girl," these little things all add up to make an already tragic love story even more so in the best way possible. Had Connery played the role instead of Lazenby, I don't think these mannerisms would have had the same emotional impact. There's just a certain vulnerability and affection that Lazenby exudes in this film that I think Connery would have a hard time matching by comparison. If Lazenby had stuck around for one or two more films, then I think we would have a better idea of what his version of Bond could have been further down the road. But as it stands today, we only have the one. His story of how he became Bond alone is worthy of recognition and is covered in great detail in the Hulu documentary Becoming Bond, which I highly recommend you watch. It's a source of inspiration for anyone who wants to follow their dreams and stay true to themselves. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a brilliant film from start to finish and clocks in at nearly 2.5 hours, so despite being Lazenby's only Bond film, he at least has a lot of screen time. Even more than 50 years later, it still stands the test of time as being one of the best and most unique films in the series. It has a love story, an amazing villain, and some of the most entertaining action set pieces in a Bond film. If you're familiar with the Bond films and are looking for something totally different from the norm, you can't go wrong with this film. To pass it up would be a disservice. George Lazenby, I salute you.
Never mind that. Go and get the brandy, huh? 5-star Hennessy, of course.
This concludes my review of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, stay tuned for the next part.
As the man says,
This never happened to the other fella.